Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Um, my name is Lauren Lozier, and I am the Associate Director in the Office of Alumni and Family Engagement. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome each of you for this special edition reunion back to school class featuring Dr. Susan Roberts. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few Zoom keeping items. First of all, participants have been muted, and we ask that you remain muted throughout the event. If you're comfortable and have not already changed your Zoom name to your first and last name, we ask that you do so now. You can rename yourself by clicking the Participants button at the bottom of your screen, hovering your mouse over your name, and then clicking the More button. Feel free to add your Davidson class year if you have one as well. The chat feature will be available. If you have questions for Susan, please utilize the Q&A. Susan will not be monitoring the chat, so please do not send questions directly to her. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. In addition, we have enabled live auto transcription for this Zoom call. If you would like to enable this on your end, you can hover over the live transcription button on your screen and subtitles should appear. Please note that the captions are not always accurate, so we ask for grace and understanding. If you have a tech issue, though, please send the chat to myself. Now for our speaker. Dr. Susan Roberts is a current professor of political science at Davidson College. She earned her undergraduate degree at Wake Forest University and her master's and PhD at the University of Notre Dame. Susan offers details about her classes on the Davidson website, in addition to how she extends her expertise to the wider community. She teaches courses in Congress, the presidency, parties and interest groups, campaign strategy, and public policy. Her research includes work on activism, on reproductive policy, interest groups, political capital and campaigns, amongst others. She is an experienced commentator on radio and TV, appearing frequently on WFAE Charlotte Public Radio, WUNC-NC Public Radio, NPR, Spectrum TV, WSOC, WCNC, BBC, and Fox 46. She has published op-eds in the Washington Post and has been quoted in the Charlotte Observer, the Charlotte Post, CSM, NPR, Reuters, Politico, and among others. She has worked with the WBT radio for a number of years as a weekly contributor, and she is one of the 4 contributors to the Old North State Politics blog. She recently was the recipient of the Diane Blair Award from the Southern Political Science Association that is presented biennially to a political scientist who has played an outstanding role in politics and/or government during his or her career. 2 years ago, she was fortunate to be awarded the Hunter Hamilton Love of Teaching Award, Davidson's highest teaching recognition, which is awarded annually at commencement. Please help me welcome Susan.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do something I only did one time, and that was a class in campaign strategy. And the people that are late are going to miss this. And this is a discussion that has a theme song. You may recognize it. I don't know if you heard that or not. Did you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. That was the Police singing I'll Be Watching You. And if you look at the music video, it's actually very creepy. I showed it to my students and they said, oh, that was a music video. I guess people your age watch those things. I said, yes, we did. And so I think it sets the tone for looking at some of the things we're going to look at. There are four general areas: big data, micro-targeting, generative artificial intelligence, and deep fakes. And they're in the order, I think, of nefarious, with big data being the most benign and deep fakes being the most nefarious. I think when we look at these, I want to tell you a few things about how I'm going to orient this. It's going to be something that is shared concerns, but my theme is that all this is more transformative than it is transactional. It's not just a means of conveying information, it is transformed political communication for any time going forward. I'm not going to talk about commercialization. I'm not going to talk about its use in marketing, and it's limited, as I said, to the United States. One of the shared characteristics of all these big data, micro-targeting, and artificial intelligence and deepfakes is faster, better, more, faster, better, more. And as these processes and this technology becomes more sophisticated, you can only see more of it. It's also getting cheaper. And those are characteristics that I think really generate a lot of interest by use in both candidates, campaigns, political action committees, political parties, and just commercial data. So I think that that's where I'm going to really orient this. And then after those four areas, I'm going to conclude with a discussion, which I hope you will join in on, of the impact of all four of these on trust in government and democracy. First, big data. This is not new. If you go to Harris Teeter or Food Lion, for me, we had a dog 5 years ago. The dog is dead. I'm still getting coupons for dog food. So that data really wasn't cleaned up. But there was an estimate, and I'm going to have to read this because I can't get it right, that there are 2.5 quintillion bytes a day generated just in the United States. And in 2020, the Republicans were happy to report that they had over 3,000 bytes and data points on every individual. And that's pretty incredible. The goal is to collect, analyze, form models. And how do they collect this data? They collect it in things that are recorded, a public record, your voting record. They look at any kind of public proceedings that you've been involved with, whether you're divorced. And they also look for social and behavioral. So they'll look at things like, where do you shop? What magazines do you subscribe to? They can look at your GPS. They can also look at things like your online markers and online shopping. It really, anywhere they can look at church attendance. And so they have enough information to tailor a message to you. And that's both good and bad. This is not new. Big data is not new. It's been collected for a long time. We just have more techniques. And the more and more techniques and the more and more information, this is something that is, in fact, the mother's milk, the genesis of the three other points that I talked of. It's the genesis of micro-targeting. It's the genesis of generative artificial intelligence, and it's the generative of deep fakes. Producing all this information allows for its use both benign and not benign. And it also provides information for both the use and disabuse of information. And I think that's interesting to keep in mind, that more information does not necessarily mean more good information. When we look at where big data is, it is ubiquitous, it is granular, and it is commercial. The candidate or the campaign they don't generate this data themselves. It's very commercialized, and they will go and really contract with one vendor over another or two vendors. And the vendors are not exclusively Democrat or Republican. It's really the highest bidder that you can get this information. Where do you see, for example, there was one article about the Masters. and the fact that they had limited, very limited commercials. They also had a map, and this is a company based on extensive interviews for over 20 years. And some of this may be a little counterintuitive, but for the Republicans, you had an interest in um, Daytona 500. You did have an interest in golf. The Democrats had an interest in tennis, and they had an interest in soccer. They shared an interest, as you might imagine, with the men's NCAA tournament and with the World Series. And on the Democratic side as well, they were more interested in the women's NCAA, and it goes down and forth. And these were profiles. It surprised me to learn that sports fans have a higher turnout than regular voters. And that's important when we look at what some of these techniques can do to generate participation and also discourage participation. So big data is out there. You know what it is. You know why it's being done. You see the pop-ups on your computer screen when you go to this site or that. They can keep track of all the websites you visit and every piece of information, from both the very personal to the political. Have you voted? What is your party affiliation? So I think that that's here to stay, and we're not going to ever get rid of that. One thing that I believe is both good and bad is micro-targeting. That's not new. Richard Viguerie, and you may not know this, who was looked on as the father of direct mail. A long time ago, he said, what can I do to help target some voters that might identify as Republicans? So he got the mailing list from Guns and Ammo and Field and Stream and thought, these are the kind of people who will be interested in our message about Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. Also, if you look at Backpacker magazine, or you look at Fitness magazine, what does it say if you subscribe to Architectural Digest? What does it say if you're Health and Fitness? What does it say if you're Southern Living? What these cues give to the collectors of this information in micro-targeting. Also, this is the crossroads, and it's not too dissimilar to marketing campaigns and as well as political campaigns. But it's going to be used, whether or not it's used in a positive way or a negative way. It really is a sequence of your political DNA, and there's no one single data point from which they can derive all this information. And that's why big data is such a help. If you look at who it helps, the promises, the positives, and the negatives, it does mean, if you look at the citizen, if you look at the political parties, and if you look at public opinion, those are three different slices, and each of them have a positive and a negative. For the citizen, it means that you can tailor information that they would like to get. They're really interested, perhaps, in something that is for choice, and something that is for quote unquote life, and pro-choice, pro-life, which they tend to use the term because that's how they describe themselves. They'd like to know if they want that information. If you're someone that really believes in immigration, your stance on immigration, they can tailor a message to you. So that's a positive. You can also get relevant information to some groups that you might not ordinarily generate. And through all these I'm going to mention, there is a race and class bias in terms of who they target and what information they're going to use. When you look at the citizen and the negative about micro-targeting, you have to look at the fact that you consider it a big brother, an invasion of privacy. You could say that it's a manipulation of your vote. And you could also say that there are excluded groups. If you see someone who's never voted, why would you worry about micro-targeting that person? Because what you want to do in a political campaign is only turn out the people who are going to vote for you. And so maybe you could exclude some people who aren't subscribing to magazines, and you can't really get as much information about these persons. For political parties, it's one of those things that's cheap, it's effective, and it's also something that generates a sense of really a sense of who the party is, and they can unify around some issues, and they can look at issues and tailor their message, even if it's not something that's high on the agenda. Maybe the Republicans are not really keen on climate change being a priority. If I know that you're really a good voter, someone who is higher income, and you're committed to climate change, I can either choose not to approach you or try to generate participation, or I can tailor my message. And the Democrats would have no problem in using that information. The negative side for parties is it can be expensive. A negative side for the parties is that it's commercialized. A negative side for the parties is that it lacks transparency. And sometimes, if you have, as we do, an electorate that's marked by partisan antipathy, and it's not just antagonism, that around 70% of each party, and these are the words that the Pew Research Center uses, 70% of the parties view the other party as a threat to democracy. And that's pretty sad. About 30% really don't want, a little bit more on 30 plus on either side, would be very upset, Pew Research, if their son or daughter married someone of the opposite party. And I think I may have just lost, I'll hit the launch meeting. Should I do that?
I think you're okay. I
Okay.
think, yeah,
Can you
keep,
see me?
I can stop it.
Can
Keep
you
going,
see me?
You're good.
As long as you can see me and hear me,
Yep, we can hear you.
that's perfectly fine. And for political opinion or public opinion, it can be something really positive as you can get more information. They're generating information to you and not necessarily a simple message of here's the candidate. It also can diversify the segments that you get and the information. You might get information about climate change and religious expression. But for public opinion, it can also generate a very negative effect of an electorate that's already divided, and that growth in hyperpolarization and hyperpartisan antipathy. The Brennan Center likened microtargeting to a drive-by shooting. It's quick, it impacts destruction, and then it's gone. And that's one of the things they say. You can get micro-targeted. They give you the message, but they don't follow up with it. It's just one and done. It can collect and divide voters on the basis of personality and other traits that might not be relevant to your political interest. Here's something I tell my students, and that is the biggest single indicator of how you're going to vote is the party that you identify with. And later on, I'll mention that voters are not blank slates. Voters are pretty savvy, and I'll mention this later, but I don't want to inject it now. But the micro-targeting does contribute to a lack of transparency, and it contributes to disinformation and uncertainty. When we look at generative artificial intelligence, there are no textbooks that I have that in the index, and that's because it's so new, and it's one of the things that is widely treated in the mass media and journalism, but it hasn't received a lot of scholarly attention. And some of it is way beyond my capacity to figure out what deep learning is and a lot about how to generate algorithms. But it can take video, imaging, text, and audio and create messages. It can work on commercials. It can work on videos. It can work on things having to do with fundraising and the messaging. It can create things about what do we do, how do we raise money. It can do almost everything in the trinity of issues of, winning an election. There are three: registration, persuasion, and mobilization. That's kind of the holy trinity. They can't really register voters, but they can mobilize them to register. And they definitely are in the persuasion and the mobilization business. This is one of the things that can really divide and generate. And I'll give you just an example how it can affect elections in particular. Video, image, audio, and text. A foreign national can get information to generate fake videos of real news situations, i.e., you will have a fake newscaster and someone maybe you're not familiar with. Foreign governments and foreign actions can report something to create the impression of dissent when there's no dissent there. They can also enable cyber criminals to use audio for robocalls and other things. And they can really act to say, for foreign nationals, and this is the video, they can do this in a way that seems convincing. This is related to deep fakes. But if we look at it, generative artificial intelligence has pluses and minuses, and especially pluses when you look at advances in science, ChatGPT. Do I monitor my students for using ChatGPT? No, that's a little difficult to do. And some students use it, but in a responsible way. And I've not been able to find, usually by the second page of a paper, I pretty much know the student's voice and what they're capable of and the information that they will research. It's the image. It can look at things that authenticate images that are already generated. You have to have a lot of imagery and photographs to do any of this. It can also, there are four things that it can mess into, and these are something that I think people are more and more aware of. It can have access to election processes, election offices, election officials, and election vendors. Generative artificial intelligence can do something like generate a video or an audio or a call that says the election is on another day. It can have one of the things that we know of recently is there was a robocall using Joe Biden's voice or a simulation of such. And so this is something that creates more uncertainty. And the American public is not really confident that they can tell the difference. Some of them can, but it engenders that sense of uncertainty. How do I know that this is genuine or not? When we get to deep fakes, there's information about generative AI that is more positive. It looks at some good things. Everything written about deep fakes is negative. Deep fakes are designed to distort. They're looking at things like they synthesize voice video and can really do the facial imprints. It's much more sophisticated, much more than photoshopping. It used to be, you can really spot a deep fake because somehow somebody's got 6 fingers, or you just don't see the mouth and the words coming out the same way. It is easy to produce. One professor, a study by the Rand Corporation, said one professor it took him 8 minutes and $11 to produce a deep fake of himself. They're a unique form of video-based learning. And it's one of those things in which, even if you rely on the print media, you rely on perhaps television and the visual media, deep fakes can be there. One thing that's interesting that I didn't realize when I was doing research on this is that deep fakes are hard to detect, but the national media there's one, the Pinocchios, and the nose getting longer. The national media is going to analyze something and put it on the nightly news and really do research into, is this a deep fake? What some scholars say is deep fakes are going to be more important down ballot, say a mayor's race. And part of that is due to the lack of local news coverage, but also the fact that no one's really looking. The attention is at the top of the ticket. I haven't seen anything to indicate what is a deep fake in a down ballot race. But you could, in some of these ones in which you take from generative AI, use something about election officials. Someone saying, this is using the voice, this was a stolen election, or there were irregularities, or I saw boxes of ballots. And I think it may not be necessarily there to confound, but it does create, undoubtedly, a sense of uncertainty. There was one of Zelensky declaring that Ukraine was going to surrender to the Russians. There was one of Donald Trump hugging Anthony Fauci. And I think deep fakes might become the rallying cry that we've had with, quote, fake news and with election deniers. I think those are things that the opponents could always say, those were deep fakes. And how would you know? Probably to conclude, and this is not really, this is one thing that reflects the theme of my talk, that this is more transformative than transactional. And that is, if you listen to these numbers, right now, according to Pew Research Foundation, 4% of Americans see the political system as working well. 4%. 16% have trust in government to do the right thing, either some of the time or most of the time. 4%, 16%. 28 are disgusted with both parties, and 65% of Americans are exhausted when they think of politics. 55% are angry. Only 10% are hopeful. When I look at myself, the people, 65% that are exhausted and the ones that are angry, I think those are voters that might be more attracted to cues, to shortcuts. And each of these provides a shortcut. I think, and here are several, it influences more than the vote. It influences our concept of democracy. It has an impact on political discourse, because sometimes you're not seeing, and this goes way beyond on negative ads. It has a decline in trust in the media. It exacerbates distrust of institutions. It aggravates our trust in our elected officials and our policymakers. It fragments an already fragmented electorate, and it could contribute to vote suppression. I think it also, and everyone would agree, that it contributes to uncertainty. But voters are not blank slates. But I think we have to look at the fact that elections are won at the margins. And even if this doesn't have an impact on the majority of Americans, there's a small slice of Americans who would make the difference in any election. And you have also a rise in the number of unaffiliated voters who would be more of a receptacle to this kind of deep fakes, generative artificial intelligence, and micro-targeting. So those are kind of considerations in looking at why this is inevitably having an impact on democracy and trust in American politics. And I'll stop there and take any questions. I don't know how long it was. I can either speak too long or too short. We can go that.
No, it was perfect, because I would assume that a lot of people are going to have some questions. So I appreciate you giving some time. We do actually have.
I knew if I knew who was out there, besides I saw Anne Browning, I would ask her.
Well, I'm going to ask you the first question. This is from Catherine McKenzie, class of 1987. Her question is, if I described myself as a centrist or a moderate Democrat, would big data analysis targeting agree with me? Do they know me better than I know me?
Yes, they know you better than you may know yourself. Think about that. The Republicans saying they have over 3,000 data points, and there are things that you might not consider. Does it make a difference that they see, if you drink wine or beer, or if you drink cocktails, they can target a message and they can put commercials to that end. It makes a difference if you're moderate, perhaps you have a mixed voting record, and maybe that is important to some people. Big data is generated, and how it's used is up to another individual, and it happens all the time. And I think that your partisan identification, is only a small part of that. And I think that, I find myself, there are not 3,000 things to know about me. I can only think of probably 50. And it's not always the case, but I think if you look at what some of the data suggest, it's out there, it's getting more, as I said, ubiquitous and easier to generate. And I wish they didn't know more about us.
The next question is from Tom Petticord. Would some of these targeting techniques be constrained if the US were to adopt the privacy regulations in place in Europe?
I don't know about Europe, I have to admit, but we have regulations that are in the pipeline. And there's a congressional proposal. Joe Biden did an executive order. There have been kind of maneuvers or suggestions that some of these organizations, Meta, TikTok, which I don't know anything about, and that they have a kind of disclaimer. Also, what is interesting to me is states are starting to pass legislation about the use of some of this micro-targeting, especially artificial generative intelligence. It's very difficult to do some of this legislation with deep fakes. I'm just not entirely familiar with some of the European models. I can tell you that it's a problem, not worldwide necessarily, but internationally, that they have the same problems. There's a lot of data about what the Canadians are trying to do. And these are things that can, when you think about it, probably the biggest arena for distortion is in foreign affairs and issues of cybersecurity and issues about if the Russians had information about Donald Trump. They're going to see this election as very close and one at which they can have an impact at that margin, and especially one that will sow discontent.
Thank you so much. We still have time. So if there are more questions out in the Zoom universe, please go ahead and either put them in the Q&A or just unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Well, I'll ask a question.
Or Susan can ask a question.
Do you agree that this is more transformative? It's changed democracy and the way we get information than transactional, meaning it's made some things easier. It's given the public access to more information. It's just a new way of generating information that's been there looking at voter records and things all the time. Does anybody think it's transactional? And I can be convinced. Now, come on there. I don't know if you're not sitting in the front row, or I was that boring, or I was too fast.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, I'll try to give an answer to your question. I think it definitely has made it easier to see for campaigning, for instance. I think it's become easier to target their, let's say, their base voters, but also to try and reel in the marginal voters on the sides, or maybe people who haven't voted yet. So that's so far. And I do have one more question for you.
Yeah.
And that would be, how do you protect yourself against, for instance, having people collect all this data about you? I know it's very difficult, especially for someone who's a very active internet user like myself. And I'd also be interested in, what do you do to maybe try and contain the information that they can collect on you?
Sure. I don't use Facebook, and I consider that kind of something that can be very invasive of your privacy. I don't use TikTok. I use Twitter just to really look at sources that I should look at, or stories, and kind of to get information.
Mhm.
I a couple of times I tweeted something that was a little, controversial, and one thing that I not that I tweeted, but I said, and a Davidson alum wrote back and said, because I used the royal we, and I was speaking for we as the nation, not we as Davidson, and excoriating in a Davidson Twitter feed. But I think I don't use Facebook. I don't use Venmo. I don't use banking online, except to check my bank account. And I don't do things that, I don't I don't go to movies that much. I do have magazine subscriptions, but I think that mine would be on the lesser side, but you still can get information about where I shop, what I subscribe to, and the church I go to. And I think and you say, how did they get that? There are ways. I quite frankly don't know. Maybe it's contributions to the church. So I think that those are just a few ways. I think that Facebook is maybe one of the biggest culprits. That's fading. But now it's, TikTok and the younger generation. You try to tell them, don't take a photo of everything you do, because that can be discovered. And so I think that's how I try to protect my privacy. And I'm sure that it's not protected. Does that help you answer the question?
Yes, it certainly does. Thank you very much.
How do you protect yourself?
Um, well, maybe about that, I should say that I do live in Europe. So I live in Germany, which I like to think has fairly strict data protection laws. Whenever I go and participate in anything, I always have to sign a data protection sheet or whatever saying
Good.
they're allowed to process my data.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, it really is. Whenever you participate anywhere, whenever you go to a doctor's office, you almost always have to sign saying that they're allowed to, for instance, contact you about your medical data. So I think it's a little bit over the top at this point. I feel like if I sign at a doctor's office, if I sign it once, it should be fine unless I reviewed it, but whatever. So I do use Instagram, but I'm not active in the sense of that I'm posting things. I more use it as a way of getting information. So looking at the news, staying connected with friends and family. I do use online banking, but I don't order things online very much. I try to support local economies, stay shopping locally. So yes, I'm a bit conflicted and trying to reflect on myself on where could data be potentially collected, and where could I maybe be more careful about it. So
Well, it sounds like you're doing, all the right things. I also don't use Instagram. And I don't know what that says about me. Some of it is, I'm just not, I get so many emails. How could I monitor anything else? So I think that's a very good question.
yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are quite busy in the Q&A chat, so I will just go ahead and run through these, Susan. So question again from Catherine McKenzie. Is this an issue of the use of black box AI, in which AI evolves to surpass human understanding and the governance of this kind of technology?
Well, I think it's one of the things that continues to divide, and it continues to have more implications for different generations of voters. And I'm not as familiar with black box as I should be, but one of the things that this can do, and I've had people have told me a story, is you can get some background information about a family. It's a granddaughter. You simulate her voice, and she can just say she has a cold to her grandparents, that she's been in an auto accident, and she, hit the car of a woman who was pregnant. There's no charges brought yet, but someone said they could find a lawyer that would make this go away. And the grandparents ended up, it was just terrible. They ended up actually putting money in an envelope, cash, on their front steps, and people came to pick it up. And think that generationally, it can have a different impact.
The next question comes from Mackenzie Sumwalt, who is from the class of 2016. We live in a time of partisanship, but it's not clear to me if one party will be more impacted by these new technologies than another. So far, have you noticed partisan difference in adoption of generative AI policy responses to deepfakes?
No, I haven't. I don't think there's been enough research, and there's not been enough research into deepfakes to know if there's a partisan bias. I think that the bottom line for both parties is to win election. In my Congress class, I remind my students that members of Congress are single-minded seekers of reelection. And it's not that they're going to cut corners, but everything they do, they need to do it responsibly. What you will see, and it's more for the Republicans than the Democrats. This can be used by political action committees and super PACs to get information. They can tailor it to you, and the candidate can say, I didn't do this. I don't have any responsibility. And so that can make it dirtier. But I don't think either party is going to refrain from active efforts in the congressional races at redistricting. They're not going to refrain from putting money where they think they can change a race. The money from interest groups and for the parties comes more from to reward a member of Congress rather than to try to bribe a member of Congress. And I don't know of any studies that look at the partisan differences. If they do, it's probably slight. This time around, this election cycle, the Democratic National Committee has outraised the Republican National Committee by a substantial amount. And the thing that helped, quell some of the fears of Democrats is the amount of money that Joe Biden was able to generate in a single fundraiser. Hi, Mackenzie.
Hey, thank you so much. This has been super interesting and also made me very much miss being in your class.
Thank you. She did research for me as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. The next question comes from Catherine Allen, class of 1981. Are there current federal laws which, if enforced, could help to prevent the use of AI to generate deep fake images or sounds as part of a presidential campaign?
Well, the FCC has made a regulation that the use of artificial generative intelligence voices in a robocall, which means, for example, this happened in South Carolina when John McCain was trying to get the Republican nomination, that someone would say, a robocall would say, would you not vote for John McCain if you knew that he had a Black daughter? And, that plants the seed of doubt. And so the FEC has injected that, and there's a lot of things pending. One thing that I think is very encouraging is efforts to regulate generative artificial intelligence and deepfakes is bipartisan. And I think it has support on both sides of the aisle. And that's a rarity today.
Another question from Tom Petticord. Are you concerned about Are you concerned about the potential effectiveness of foreign states, Russia and China in particular, in influencing U.S. elections?
Yes, I am concerned. I don't know that we have enough policies in place to deal with cybersecurity. And if we look at where it's coming from or how it's coming, it's very good. I don't know why that this wouldn't be a thing that if it's out there and it's fast and cheap and effective, why wouldn't a foreign government, and I don't encourage this, why wouldn't they seek to get involved, at least at the margins? I think the most prevalent way is to foment, to give an impression that there's a lot of disagreement, and that some of these things that are very incendiary, that people might look and say, I didn't know they thought that. I didn't know this group was using those tactics. For example, I didn't know that Black Lives Matter rioted, and they could show really artificial, visuals about this, or take visuals from something else and make it look as if it's real. So I don't know about having an impact on what I call counting and casting, the regulation about who can cast a vote and voter suppression versus who counts the vote. And that is where we're, getting a lot of pushback that we never did. We're having people that are election deniers, as a term, running for office, and we have persons that you have more people today understanding what the Secretary of State office is and running for those offices. And so I think that it's both inside and outside, but I can't imagine that there isn't some interference by foreign governments in our elections. And I don't know, but I don't think we interfere in other elections. I just don't know. There is a division of cybersecurity. And it was so funny when I got something from the division of cybersecurity, and it looked false to me. So I had to look up if that information was genuine, and it was.
We have another question from David Clement. He asked, there are several services that promise to remove your personal information from the internet. Is there a downside of not being digitally present by removing yourself from the internet?
Well, some of it is a plus to the citizen, as you may receive information that you really want to know something about. And it's really funny that what of an older generation, that they tend to turn out more, and that snail mail is very important. So you can get a flyer, you can put it over, and then you can look at it again. And I think the downside to taking yourself off is to limit some of the information you might get. And you could limit whether or not either party wants to mess with you. You're an uncertain thing. They're not going to message that much to an unaffiliated or independent voter, except if they have someone that has a distinct lean.
We have time for one more question. If anybody wants to raise their hand or put it in the chat, I'm happy to pass that along to Susan.
Let me just say one thing is I look at this as the impact on democracy as inevitable, and it's not necessarily a positive. I think we have to be more hyper aware. And in the polarized times, anything that can fragment the electorate is probably not a good thing. And anything that can fragment an electorate in the context of those numbers from the Pew Research Center is unhealthy.
We have a question from Mike Harris. Mike, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Roberts, and
Hi.
thank you for doing this. You mentioned several times that your magazine subscriptions were important to big data. Far as I know, not a lot of people subscribe to magazines anymore. They get their news from Apple News or Facebook. Is that component still as important? And I have one side note. You had your theme song by the Police.
Yeah.
I think John Huey, class of 78, managed the Police, and he brought them to Love Auditorium.
He's in town this weekend. It's
Yeah.
the class of my husband, Jim Murphy. I'm a big fan, but I think that they can use any data point that they can get. I don't think it's as important by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it's just one other data point. I mean, I don't know what they're going to derive from the fact that I like wine and bourbon. I don't drink much beer. Except they know when to advertise. If they have information, they know when to advertise to me.
You'll probably get a lot of invites to the Daytona 500 from NASCAR.
I mean, they didn't mention NASCAR. I thought if they mention NASCAR on the Republican side, they're kind of uninformed. And I didn't mention how these the targeting and micro-targeting works with people who don't need to be convinced about anything. And that would be, at some point, there is no equivalent of the MAGA group or consciousness in the Democratic Party. There's no real, it's not a labor union, there's not a firm constituency. And so there are people for whom there's no need to micro-target, except maybe with deep fakes and negative news about the other party, just to get to mobilize.
Well, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with all of us today and leading us in this conversation. I also want to extend a big thank you to the class of 1979 Reunion Committee for sponsoring this event. Do note that this event was recorded and will be available on our website in about 2 weeks. Finally, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your night. Thanks again, Susan.
Thanks.